Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm thrilled to have with me today Jeff Wald. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and today we're going to be talking with Jeff Wald, who's the founder of Work Market and author of the new book, The End of Jobs. Very catchy title. Jeff, it's wonderful having you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to have further conversation.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So, Jeff, for people who don't know about you or the work that you do, can you just give us a brief background as to where you came from?
Sure. Well, I've started a number of internet companies. First one failed miserably and nearly bankrupted me. And the second one we built up eventually got sold to Salesforce. And the third one is a company called Work Market, which is the foundation for the research on my book. Work Market is enterprise software that enables companies to manage their freelance populations. We raised about 100 million in venture capital from SoftBank and Union Square Ventures and a few others. And we sold the company 3 years ago to ADP, the world's largest HR and human capital management software company. And with that, I was able to get the space to finish this book that I had been writing for 5 or 6 years prior to the acquisition. The book is focused on the future of work and specifically, what can we learn from history? What can we learn from data? What can we learn from how companies actually engage workers in order to make thoughtful predictions about the future of work?
And I'm really excited to get into that topic because I think there's a lot of basically guesswork and random predictions out there in the market when people say, oh, in 10 years time, everyone will be working remotely with 3 jobs simultaneously, et cetera, et cetera. No one seems to actually have much to back up these claims, though. So
very true and
yeah.
very frustrating. I get so annoyed, and it was annoyance that led me to write the book, because I was going to conference after conference, and people specifically in the on-demand world would make the statement, "Oh, by 2020, 50% of the labor force is going to be on demand," and I was like, "Who said this? Who came up with that? That's not based on any data. That is a ridiculous prediction." And yet everybody was saying it. And by the way, when we hit 2020, you know what they did? Oh, no, by 2030. Oh, you're just pushing it out 10 years. You people are morons. Stop talking.
So before we get into the actual science of what you see happening, there's the prediction you just mentioned about what's going to be happening by 2020. What other myths do you see very often out there in the marketplace about how people claim the future is going to be different for the future of jobs? And which of those myths are really off the mark, do you think?
Well, the on-demand labor one is so off the mark, and it is so prevalent. When I started Work Market in 2010, in the US and in the EU, the size of the on-demand labor market was somewhere between 25 and 27% of the workforce. It was very big. And people make this assumption that it's relatively new. It is not new. It has been around for generations, and it's been about that big for generations. But for some reason in 2010, people thought, boop, it's going to skyrocket. And again, that was based on no data, just nothing. And even though it was the same size in 2010, then 2011, 2012, people were like, no, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And so that to me was always the biggest myth. And we see in 2020 that the on-demand labor market is somewhere between 27 and 30% of the labor force. So it's grown. It has definitively grown. Slow and steady growth over a 10-year period. So that to me was the biggest myth and the easiest thing to debunk, especially over time. Right now, the biggest myth I see is in the remote workforce. That, oh my gosh, now everyone's going to be remote and everyone's going to work remote. And again, it's not based on a huge amount of data. I will tell you this, I was on a panel the other day and somebody said, I think when this pandemic's over and the labor markets have steadied, we're going to see 50% of the US workforce work remotely. And I kind of turned and I didn't turn as if we were in a conference room together. I turned on the Zoom room. It's an audience of a few thousand people. And I just said, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. How do you juxtapose your 50% prediction with the fact that only 42% of the US workforce can work remotely? Because clearly people in extraction industries and manufacturing and transportation and logistics, a lot of retail jobs can't work remotely. And he said, oh, well, I didn't know that. I was like, oh my gosh, shouldn't you though?
If
Shouldn't
you're
you
going to
know
be
that?
making claims like that.
Like you've predicted more people are going to work remote than can possibly work remote. So it has a 0% probability of coming true. That stuff is a little too prevalent right now, and it's people not using data to make their predictions. They're just like, oh, it's going to be 50%. So maybe 50% is just the thing everyone throws out there, just thinking, well, it's right in the middle. So I don't know, but it's very frustrating.
I think I don't have that many data points to take in order to make my own predictions, but I know right now we're recording this in early 2021. Germany, where I'm based, is still basically on a lockdown, and the government is telling every company, unless there is an actual reason why someone physically needs to be outside of their home, please do everything possible to enable them to work remotely. And even with that, we're currently at only about 27% people working remotely. The government is trying to get that up much, much higher. But if you're in the middle of a pandemic and the government is basically forcing companies to work remotely, and that's only reaching less than a third of people,
Yeah.
then it's probably going to take somehow an even bigger change, either in society or technology, to make that happen.
And over the long term, anything is possible. And certainly a lot of jobs in manufacturing and extraction industries and a host of other things will slowly be automated away. And so it's possible, but in the near term, the next 5 years, in the medium term, in the next 20, it is highly unlikely that things will break from their historic trends. It's highly unlikely that the data patterns will see some sort of anomalous jump. You just don't see that in labor statistics. Labor statistics move very slowly, very methodically, except when there's a pandemic, when there's a global financial crisis, when there's a Great Depression, then we see huge moves, but we also see things revert to the mean very quickly. Now, I don't think we're going to revert back to where we were in regards to remote work. Remote work grew from 1.5% of the labor force to about 3% of the labor force between 2010 and 2020. And maybe it'll end up at 8% of the labor force when all is said and done, and we are, God willing, on the other side of a pandemic. But 50% is ridiculous. And if you want to, we can dive into where that 8% comes from, because if you're going to make predictions, you should be able to back it up. And they should be logical, they should be reasonable, and they should be defendable.
Absolutely. If people have been listening to my podcast and reading my insights, they know I'm a very big proponent for evidence and evidence-based insights. It's one of the reasons I'm interested speaking to you for the book that you've got coming out. You put a lot of emphasis on what does the data say, what does the history say about which direction the workplace is going to go into. So why don't you take us through some of those insights that you've gathered?
Well, let's look at history. When we see periods of tremendous technological innovation that leads to huge productivity increases, we generally call those industrial revolutions, and there have been 3 of them. And to me, it's important to study how companies, workers, and society adjusted to those very big changes in the supply and demand balance, because we have what many are calling the 4th industrial revolution that we are in the early stages of. Let's not pretend it's about to happen. We've been in it for a couple of years. And here's what we tend to see. We tend to see people freak out and a lot of fear mongering in the beginning. Oh my God, all the jobs are going to go, society's going to collapse. We tend to see some actual social and economic dislocation occur because there is a good number of job loss that occurs. And because the job loss feeds into the fear mongering. And then we start to see more jobs being created than are lost. We see higher standards of living. We see people working fewer hours. And that ends up being the conclusion point. And those are, again, are very clear data patterns. People working fewer hours, almost uninterrupted over the last 200 years. The average human has worked fewer and fewer hours to get to a higher standard of living. Again, very clear data pattern. Standards of living increasing, and the number of jobs have always increased. Again, almost uninterrupted data patterns. So are there reasons to believe this time is different? Of course there are. and we shouldn't dismiss them. This change is going to happen much quicker than previous changes. This change is going to be more global than other changes. This change is going to impact the service industry the way other changes really haven't. And so reasons to think they're different, but those differences will happen on the margin, and we are deep in the fear-mongering state. We've got a little bit of the social and economic dislocation occurring, but we are already starting to see job growth outside of the pandemic impacts, and we will continue to see those trends and patterns.
Doesn't that contradict the title of your book, though? If you're saying that we've continuously seen a rise in the number of jobs available, your book's titled "The End of Jobs," though.
It is true. I did call it that. And, I may have been clickbaity on that. I will fully admit it is a catchy title because, oh my God, the end of jobs. And I'm feeding into the fear mongering that I just, panned. So shame on me. Look, the point of the title of the book was not that jobs are going to go. It's the end of the job as we know it. And the job of we know it really over the last 70 or 80 years has been what I would call the one office, one manager, 9 to 5 job. That job is ending. The death of that job has been sped up by the pandemic. We are moving to what I will call fluid, team-based, work from anywhere, always on. That job is the new job. So the end of jobs is the end of the one office, one manager, 9 to 5 job, not the end of a job in general.
And are you making that statement based on, again, what we would expect to happen, or have you seen data which is actually saying this is provable? There are directions to this.
This is very provable. I mean, this change has been occurring for 30 years. We have seen the breaking of the office construct where people have begun to use outsourced labor. People have increased their usage slow and steady of on-demand labor. We've certainly seen the 9 to 5 office day bleed into our entire lives. I mean, I'm not sure we need many more data than just to say to everybody, and everyone would go, yeah, that is the truth. That shit happens. And so those are things that have been very clear. And then remote work also, we did see it double from 1.5% to 3%. We're seeing a huge increase now. And the work from anywhere is not just remote work, because remote work is a very specific definition. That means more than 50% of the time you are not in that office. So that has tax nexus implications, that has office infrastructure implications. Where we have not as much data is on flexible work arrangements. The idea that I don't need to be in the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I'll be there 4 days a week. I'll be there every 2 out of every 3 weeks, because it is important for us. And that's why it's important for us to be in an office with people. And so I always say we got to look at history, we got to look at data, and then we got to actually look at how companies actually engage workers and deploy capital. And that's kind of the mushy part, because in that is that people are social animals. They don't want to just be sitting up in the mountains by themselves working remotely because they can. They actually want to be in their office with their colleagues. Survey after survey tells us that. Data that tells us that is that 93% of people that work remote, meaning more than 50% of the time they're not in the office, live within a commutable distance of the office. So they may not go there more than 50% of the time, but they go there. They can't be across the world. They can't be up in the mountains 10 hours away. They will be somewhere where they can get to the office and have that team experience, that bonding experience, that trust building experience, that creativity experience that is so necessary. So those are the things that help us understand and start to make predictions that are more thoughtful. We need to think about how workers and companies actually engage.
And is it still a one size fits all model? Not necessarily one boss with a team who are all the same, or everyone has the permission to work remote, but along these guidelines. I'm just thinking of the difference in organizations that I know, where some team members, they want to be in the office the whole time. Some team members have children, and especially nowadays, they're not available during the same working hours as other team members, but they still get the work done when they can. Where does this differentiation between different people, their needs and their desires come in?
Such a great question, and highlights an incredibly powerful point in the world of labor, which is it is never one size fits all. There are some industries very, very focused on remote work and very capable of doing it, and their employees love it, and blah, 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 blah. There are some industries that have almost 0% of their workers with flexible work arrangements or remote. There are some industries, some job functions that lend themselves to on-demand labor. Some industries and job functions have zero on-demand labor. And so when you look at different job functions, different industries, different geographies, different companies, there are entirely different models that some trends apply to and some trends don't. And then certainly when you're thinking within a company, you have different people with different needs. Some people may want to be fully remote. Some people may just want a flexible work arrangement. Some people want to be in that office, or maybe their job function demands that they're in the office. It might be wonderful for the janitor to say, well, I'd like to work, remote. You might go, no, 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 you actually need to be here and clean the office. And okay, that might be, a very clear example and maybe not applicable to a lot of people's work, but it highlights the point that everybody's job function is different. And it is a very common mistake in the world of labor to paint everything with the same brush when you are dealing with massively different trends, massively different dynamics, massively different regulatory environments, competitive environments, again, industry by industry, job function by job function, geography by geography.
Um, Related to the way that jobs are changing in the future, one area where people seem to have a lot of fear is automation, and the premise that jobs that they have now or jobs that they see other people having now are really at risk of being automated. And
Sure.
Someone who I care very dearly about, and I often have heated discussions about simple things like self-service checkouts at supermarkets or self-driving cars. And I think it's the future. It's the way that it should go. It's much more effective and efficient. This other person thinks, what about this person who's not gone to university, who can only do sort of supermarket checkouts? Is there a risk in the future? And do you have any sort of examples from history of where a whole sort of group of jobs are completely made obsolete and redundant? And what happens to people who used to fill those types of jobs?
So, few things. Are there examples of history where entire job classifications go away? Of course. Are those jobs that have nearly all of the component tasks in their function as repetitive high volume tasks, the same thing over and over again? Yes, those are the jobs that are very susceptible to automation. But the important thing to remember here is that just because a technology exists doesn't mean the job goes away. We look at things like waiters and waitresses. The technology has existed to eliminate waiters and waitresses as a job function for 15 years. I do not need a person to hand me a piece of paper to tell me what my, the specials are and for me to have some recommendations from, and then to write that down and bring it to the kitchen. An algorithm can tell me my recommendations. Oh, you like this, people like you like that. Oh, this wine pairs well with that food, right? I can do that all on my mobile phone. I can place the order and it can go right into the kitchen and a runner can bring out my food. And yet, we have seen very little displacement of waiters and waitresses, pandemic aside. Just because the tech exists doesn't mean the job goes away, because there are a lot of things that go into that labor resource planning decision. Customer experience, the competitive environment, the cost of the tech, and a host of other things from a regulatory and workflow standpoint. And so we also, when we do see a tech that will replace a job, it doesn't mean that it happens overnight. Those changes happen pretty deliberately and pretty slowly. We can think about the ATM. And this is an example I talk about in the book. The ATM took 20 years for it to appear in every single bank. When it finally appeared in 1995 in the United States, there were 500,000 bank tellers. And what do you think everyone predicted about bank teller employment in the United States in 1995, right? It's going to go to zero. I mean, it's in the machine's name. It's called an automated teller machine. It's not disguising what it is. It's automating the job of the teller. And yet, pre-pandemic, we had 600,000 bank tellers in the United States. We saw a 20% increase over a 25-year period. And people look at that, they're like, oh, well, that's an example of cobots. And the answer is, well, maybe. The cobot being the robot does the repetitive high volume task, and the human can go do the more customer service oriented, higher value added task. And we did see tellers come out from behind the bulletproof glass, and we saw them have iPads and talk with customers about investment products or mortgage products and give them a lollipop and things like that. Okay, but what we also saw in the United States was banking deregulation, and we saw a near doubling of the number of bank branches. And we did see the average number of tellers per branch drop from 21 to 13. And so the point being that all of these things are incredibly complicated. They take a very long time to propagate, and they take a very, very long time to do the labor resource planning necessary to think about that specific job function. And yet in 1995, you could have taken all bets because everybody would have said the bank teller job is going to go to zero. The point being, it's not just a tech exists. You need to be very thoughtful. You need to use your critical thinking. You need to look at the entire picture of labor resource planning and then start to put together an idea of what might happen to that job function. Am I willing to bet that bank teller employment increases another 20% over the next 25 years? No, I am not. Am I willing to bet because of mobile banking and increases in ATM that it goes to zero? No, I'm not.
Jeff, I've been really enjoying our conversation so far. I know we're coming up to the end of the discussion, but I wanted to leave sort of with one final question. For companies who are thinking about the end of jobs, the sort of insights you bring in your book, what sort of things should they be doing to plan?
Well, the first thing I would say is to systematize. If you don't actually know exactly the kind of workforce you have, what their skills are, and a host of other things, and most companies do not. They know who their people are, but they don't understand the skill sets and their availabilities and a host of other things. And by the way, when I say workforce, I mean your full-time employees, your part-time employees, your temp employees, your contingent employees, your consultants, your freelance employees, all of them are your workforce. And so if you don't understand your entire workforce and all of your skill sets and availabilities, it's very difficult to plan for what demand you may see in the future and whether or not you can meet that demand with your workers providing the goods or services necessary. The second is to be thoughtful and not to react to, oh, this new tech exists, therefore that, right? And I doubt any C-suite executive does those things, but look at what the regulations say, look at what places like the World Economic Forum, which I think is by far the best research institute doing work on the fourth industrial revolution, look at what they're saying industry by industry, geography by geography. Think about what your legal team and what your HR team are saying about the regulatory environment, about the skills environment, because you want to be an employer of choice. You want to have the best workforce with the best skills, and you need to understand what those skills are and where you need to, either through recruiting or through increased training and development, have an agile workforce across all your labor spectrum, freelancers, temps, full-time employees, that can meet the needs of your customers.
Jeff, it's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you. If people want to find out more about you, your work, and your insights, where can they go to find out more?
Well, the book is available on Amazon, and we had the pleasure of becoming an Amazon bestseller and being the #1 book in all the HR categories for a little while. Amazon rechecks that every hour, so it was fun to have it for a bit. And you can always reach out on LinkedIn and anyone that wants to talk about the future of work and how we can use history, data, and how companies actually engage workers and deploy capital to make thoughtful predictions. I always love having those conversations.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get those links down in the description below. Jeff, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they're backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.